Right, so that's a big story that's up for discussion today. In fact, the guest who's joining us now live on the broadcast is Andrew Freris, the CEO of Ecognisis Advisory. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here on ET Now. First things first, when Donald Trump called this deal the largest deal in history, how large is the deal actually for the United States?
Actually, he was lying. He told us 1 week ago that Japan was the biggest deal he's ever did. He must make up his mind. And I have no idea what a big deal is. I mean, in which sense? 15%? Well, he was asking for 50%. So I would reckon that from his point of view, it's not a very big deal. Anyway, we are used to bombast, lies, inaccuracies, and terminological inexactitudes. Europe gets a 15%. That's only the beginning. There is a lot more which has not been decided yet. And in specific, imports from Europe to United States of steel and aluminum and metal products are still getting a 25% plus import duties. That was not lifted. And also farmers' exports from the European Union to United States are likely to also be subjected to very substantial duties. So it is not true at all that it is a flat 15%. This is what is so irritating, because everybody that has the slightest knowledge of what a trade deal involves, it involves a volume this big full of details. So of course, they're not going to tell you the details because they're not what they're actually telling you. And if I sound a little bit blunt, let's prepare ourselves with a deal with India. You're going to hear also that it was the biggest deal ever that was made or that could have been made. And of course, my immediate reaction will be to rush and look at the details.
Right.
It's okay. It is better than
right. Absolutely. We need to look at the details. And
one second. But it is much worse. The initial duties between the European Union and United States was about 2.5%. So everybody's celebrating it's 15%. Oh, good. You know, words fail me, literally. The world is a very strange place.
Right, Andrew. So I get your point. I get your point about the fact that, you know, what Donald Trump states, well, this is the largest deal in history. You rightly stated that he said that for Vietnamese deal as well. The fact that they completely opened up the market. He said that about Japan as well. So this should be taken with a pinch of salt. But let me proceed on to the other questions that I have, Andrew. Would you agree then this is not really a fair deal, given the fact that the European Union is essentially giving concessions of 0% to the United States, while the United States expect that at 15%? And this is something that's also coming from France's Prime Minister as well, who's called this deal a dark day, on the day that it has happened, that a dark day for the European Union.
I don't disagree with that, because we don't end up with 15, we end up with 15. This is a good deal. The European Union should not have entered into any discussion whatsoever with Trump threatening to impose 50%. He lifts up and then we talk. That's exactly what the Chinese did. Okay, there is a lot to criticize about China, but when it came to deal with Trump, they got the right idea. They are not going to be blackmailed. And I hope to God that the Modi administration follows that. They enter there saying, you threaten, we'll threaten you straight back. And I have a terrible feeling we're not going to get this. And I will be severely disappointed.
Right, Andrew, but are enough countries, when you say that countries have to fight back, are enough countries doing that? We've seen that happen with Japan, now with the European Union. Not only, is there a discrepancy in the kind of duties that both the sides are imposing at each other, but I think the European Union is also committing to investments into the United States, so whether it's related to oil or several other sectors. But my question to you now is, how might this deal influence future trade negotiations globally? We're given to understand that a deal with India could also come in soon.
We should take all the important lessons, and that is, don't give in to blackmail. Okay, Trump always backs down if people stand up and says, I am not going to come into the room with you saying, if you don't sign this paper, I'm going to impose 50%. You lift up and then I'll come into the room. That's incredibly simple and important, because we're discussing about huge democracies like India with a freely elected government. Modi represents the will of the Indian people. It will be very sad if the will of the Indian people is not put on the table and says, you dare touch it and see what happens. You know, I'm a lonely voice. I'm a very small potato. I have zero influence on anything. But I, as a citizen, and also as somebody that knows India for more than 50 years, I will hate to see the same kind of deal to be dealt out to India. With the European Union, yes, it's a shame. European Union is possibly, depends how you measure it, the second biggest economy in the world. Well, that's not the way you negotiate.
Absolutely, Andrew. And India has maintained its red lines around agriculture, dairy and GM crops, and it is not budging. And perhaps which is why they have challenges. There are challenges that have emerged on this at least interim trade deal between the United States and India. But I'd request you to stay on with us. Let's first take a look at what my colleague Srishti has filed with respect to this deal between the United States and European Union.
Oh, well, yes, that's a big deal that has been finally through between EU as well as US, wherein a 15% tariff has been agreed on most of the EU imports to the US, and along with that, a 0% tariff across the sectors is what both the nations have agreed for, be it from aircraft and the plane parts, certain chemicals, semiconductor equipment, and select generics as well. But the key to note is that with respect to the sectors, it's cars that will have a 15% levy, and that's indeed positive for the companies which have exposure to the EU markets as well, because last time, or rather in previous parts, when such tariff discussions were through, a 25% tariff was actually announced, and that was indeed concerning for major companies, and especially those which have exposure or manufacturing units in the European Union. Along with that, with respect to the Indian companies as well, we have seen companies like Tata Motors actually, because of this particular concern, have actually announced the pause of the shipments to the United States from the manufacturing plants of EU. But again, that after some time that was resumed. But this particular news flow of a 15% tariff kicking in is indeed positive and actually better than what was actually anticipated earlier. So on the back of this particular news, that's indeed positive for the global automotive sector, the companies specifically that have exposure to the EU, and then of course Tata Motors within the Indian pack will be the key to watch out for, because if we look at the numbers then for the financial year of 24, for the JLR unit, contribution coming in from the US market was actually more than 20%, but that increased substantially. And if we look at the recent numbers, that's more than 30%. But well, of course, the companies have been taking some bit of an adjustments or making some adjustments because of the tariff tantrum all around. Other than cars and other than the automotive division, companies like Bharat Forge, they do have exposure to the European market, some of the clients over there. And along with that, the Indian IT companies, they also drive some bit of clientele from the European majors, be it from Infosys, Wipro, TCS. These are the major IT companies that have clientele from the European markets. And because of this particular deal that is through, that bodes well for the economy as well, indeed. So that's another positive news flow that eventually might impact the Indian IT companies as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Srishti, for putting that into perspective on how this is going to have a bearing on Indian companies, particularly sectors. You mentioned about the IT company, you mentioned about defense as well, and auto. So, Andrew, let me ask that question from you. What kind of a bearing will it have on Indian companies that are operating in the region?
Sorry, this is a very interesting question. But I have no idea what is the triangular trade between India, the European Union, and the United States for me to give you an answer. And I suspect it's going to be very, very small. So I have no idea if I'm a big industrial exporter in India, let's say clothing or small engineering material, how this is going to impact my business with the States. We have to wait to see what's going to be the deal between India and the States, not United States and the European Union. Other than taking as example, and I'm sorry, I was listening to Asifa that we have very good news that the car industry is going to hit by 15% import duties. That's not good news. Up to now, they were being hit 2%. That's terrible news. You know, the words have lost their meaning anymore. Okay, so the answer is I have no idea, not because I'm ignorant, but because the kind of triangular trade affected by what's happening between the European Union and United States, we have to know what is the role of the trade of India with the European Union and through that to the United States.
Right.
God help us.
Right, so it's too early perhaps to sort of weigh in on how the impact is going to be on Indian companies and sectors that are operating in the region. But let me ask you, Andrew, are the markets as of now pricing in tariff negotiations given the fact that Donald Trump is hastily making all of these deals with countries? A deal with India is impending. Are we pricing in tariff negotiations so far compared to what the sense was back in March and April?
Well, what all this is missing out completely is the impact this is going to have on the American economy. Okay, Trump goes around saying that there's going to be millions of billions of dollars coming in, paid by the American citizens. He keeps forgetting that the tariff is not paid by the Indians or the Japanese, a small percentage of that. And the evidence sometimes is that in the majority of cases, 100% is paid by the Americans. So Trump goes around saying that he's taxing the American people and he's absolutely thrilled. Also, this idea that the Europeans are going to put in 600 billion US of investment. Since when a trade agreement involves European companies investing in United States unless they are investing in United States in order to avoid the tariffs? But that's not the way that you do investment. That I don't understand either. And of course, everybody is very pleased and he's delighted that 600 billion. Of course, I'm laughing like that because I would like to see this happen. Okay. Right. And also we have the idea that 750 billion worth of United States. Yeah, I will quietly wait to see that happen.
Absolutely.
All these kinds of promises on the basis of past global negotiations, not just this one, okay, are simply not worth the paper they're written on. So if you ask me my overall conclusion...
right, Andrew. In fact, when you mentioned... Right.
If it is a good deal for today, that instead of two...
Right, Andrew. So when you mention about...
No, it isn't.
Okay. It's not a good deal, it's not a fair deal, and that's something that, of course, France's Prime Minister has also said, like I stated earlier. But Andrew, one final question before we let you go. You're talking about, getting in investments from these countries with which the United States is striking these deals, and of course with the EU as well. There have been significant purchase agreements of liquefied natural gas, oil, nuclear fuels as well that is likely to come in. This is something that we saw with Japan as well, where Japan has made commitments to invest in the United States. Could these commitments also be part of the deal that will be arrived at by the United States with India as well, given the fact that Donald Trump is looking at making manufacturing big for the United States?
I'm laughing because here is the president of the richest country in the world asking one country, which in terms at least of per capita income, it's still very poor in relative terms, to come and invest. This is a kind of political blackmail of a very different form. By all means insist that products from United States to India should bear zero tariffs. Well, I can live with that. But in return for India investing in the States, I don't think he's going to be that crude or that stupid, okay, to go and ask for it. He can do that with the Europeans because the Europeans said yes, and they're not going to do it in any case. So there you go.
Right. So that's unlikely to happen. That's unlikely to happen as far as India's deal with the United States is concerned. Andrew, we have to see whether there's going to be an interim trade deal or the focus is largely going to be on the bilateral trade agreement, which both the governments are looking at arriving at by the fall of this year. But for the moment, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your analysis and your thoughts with us on this big trade deal that Donald Trump claims. But you say that this is not a fair deal. This is not at all a big deal as Donald Trump has been claiming. Thank you very much, Andrew, once again.
It's a pleasure.